Thanks, Manga. Hey everyone, go ahead and take a seat. Before we dive into our conversation in our teaching series, there's a couple of things that I want to let you know about, because this is one of the biggest weeks in the calendar for Epiphany Station. Coming up this week, we have both the Pennington County Parade and the Pennington County Fair. And we take part in both these things kind of regularly, unless there's like a global pandemic or something, then we kind of take a break. But every other year over the last 7 years, we've been part of the parade, because here's what happens. The streets are lined with people from our region. Between 6,000 and 8,000 people come out for this thing to get something from the parade. And so we make the most of that. And we seek to bring to them the thing that is most important to them, the thing that they need more than anything else. We want to tell them who Jesus Christ is and why God loves them so much and what he's done for them. So this year, not really different in that respect. And what we want to do is we want you to have you walk with us. We purchased 100 of these t-shirts that if you're going to walk with us in the parade, we'd love you to grab one on your way out. If you'd like to make a contribution for them, that's great. Although if you can't make a contribution and you're going to walk with us, take one anyway. We're going to walk, we're going to give away, we're going to invite people to come and be a part of a worship experience that's happening the following Sunday in the middle of the fair. It's called Church at the Fair, and it's going to be Sunday at noon in the band shell at the fairgrounds, because we've been invited to be able to host that worship experience. And so what we want to do is we want to use the parade to invite as many people as we can to that Sunday to come and hear about why we're so obsessed with Jesus Christ, why we love what he's done for us, and now we love and live in return. And so if you want to be a part of the efforts in Pennington County Parade and the fair, there's a few things you can do. First of all, grab yourself one of these t-shirts, because if they take a picture of your back, it takes them to our homepage website where they can register to win free stuff and hear all about the invitation to Sunday. And next, you can bring cases of water with you, because we want to give out as many bottles of water as we can during the parade. And then, and maybe the biggest one, for Sunday at Church at the Fair, plan to bring someone along with you. You are the greatest invite to come and hear about Jesus Christ. Not a t-shirt, not a ticket, not me on a big screen. You are. Because you showing someone that they are worth your time, effort, and even the awkwardness of an invitation to church shows them that you've thought about it and that you think it's worthwhile for them to be a part of it. So will you think about a person, a family, a couple for you to bring along to Church at the Fair this Sunday, so we can help bring more and more people into the family, which is our God-given vision, to embrace people, more people into the family than ever before. We're not content with just sitting in here in God's family on our own. We want as many people to hear about it and have the opportunity to respond. So that's how you can be involved in the parade and the fair. Now, we are in this teaching series going on throughout this summer, in which we're walking through a letter that was written to the church that is known as 1 Peter, written by a guy called Peter, to help people understand some of the how-tos of loving God, loving people. How are you a follower of Jesus in crisis? How are you going to do that in persecution? How are you going to do it in the mundane and the ordinary and the day-to-day? And right now, as we've been tracking along chronologically throughout this letter, we're in a place where we get to talk about one of the greatest wrestles in the church. This is actually one of the greatest wrestles that mankind has ever had, and now more than ever continues to be one of the great fights that is had between us. If you've been following along, you know exactly where we are, but we're in 1 Peter chapter 3, and he's going to talk about a thing which a friend of mine beautifully put, can either be a continual source of joy leading you towards spiritual growth, or it can also be a thing that puts you in such a place that there are no words for that particular kind of misery. Not one of us have perfected what we're going to talk about, yet all of us are affected by it. Because 1 Peter chapter 3 is about marriage. It's about marriage, and very specifically, with no apology, it's about the roles of a husband and the roles of a wife in marriage. So as soon as you start talking about those things in church, everyone starts to develop the caricature that they have in their head of what a conversation in church is going to be like when we talk about marriage and we talk about male and female roles. We've got severe opinions on this thing, so I want to make sure that I dispel a couple of things before we get going. Nothing that Peter is going to say here, nothing that we're going to talk about, if you follow it and do it, is a guarantee to solving all of your marital problems. None of it is to be used as a weapon to go home with and say, see, you're not doing that. That's why our marriage isn't great. It's not an opportunity for us to try and say, oh, this is what the ideal marriage looks like. This person over here is doing and this person isn't, and that's why they don't enjoy marriage, or they do. This doesn't say, here's how to have a happy, nice, quaint marriage. What it is going to say is if we desire to get the blessings out of marriage, what it's supposed to do, what it was founded for, if we want to receive those, and we aren't willing to do these things the way that God has called us to follow in his prescription for what marriage is supposed to be, it won't happen. It won't happen, and we will continue to miss out on what he has created it to be and why he's created it to be that way. This isn't an answer to all things, but it's going to be the answer as to why some of us may never experience what God wants for our marriages. This is not going to be, here's how to do it happy. It's going to be, here's how it's going to be, continue to be hard, but here's why. Here's why we're going to do it and what we should expect from it. And all of it is written in context of a whole letter. If you've been tracking along, conversations 4 and 5 in this series are what leads into this. 4 and 5 is about who you are, your value, your identity. Conversation, the last one, was all about unfair treatment and abused authority. These things are what lead us into this place of 1 Peter chapter 3. And for most of us, we don't like what we hear. But here's what he says. He says, in the same way, so in reference to everything we've covered in my letter so far, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands, that even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, or beautiful clothes. You should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit which is precious to God. This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They trusted God and accepted the authority of their husbands. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband Abraham and called him her master. You are her daughters when you do what is right without fear of what your husbands might do. In the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. Here's the sum up. Women, if you should so choose to be married, and you so choose to be married into a marriage that is going to honor God, God is going to ask you to give over authority to your husband. And men, if you should so choose to be married into a marriage that is going to honor God, you're going to be asked to give up your life to honor your wife. The problem we have with both of these things is we have this idea of getting into a relationship or into marriage, and we think, I shouldn't be asked to give anything. Yet God is asking us all to give up something that we genuinely don't want to give up. Authority and our lives for the sake of another, those things don't come naturally to us. How many married people do I have in the room? Hands up, we've got married people in the room. Okay, there's a few married people in the room. People who know someone who's married or have ever heard about marriage. Perfect, all right, covering most. If we were to take a survey and ask everyone in the room why you should get married, or why we get married, or the point or the purpose of marriage, I'm guessing we'd have very few answers that like absolutely lockstep, even between husband and wife. I think we'd get a lot of answers that vary from one another massively as to why we got married, or what we do this whole marriage thing for. And I think if we're actually honest, a lot of us who are married, have been married, would admit that when we first got married, we maybe actually got married more for us than anyone else. We say, yeah, I'm going to marry my wife because I love her. But really why I got married is because I really liked that she loved me and was looking forward to being loved by her. Like very few of us are thinking to ourselves, oh, you know what I can't wait to do? I can't wait to get married and to like give my life over for them. Or to give them authority, or to live for them, to honor them, to value them, to give and to give and to give. Like, no, if we're honest, We tend to get married because we want something. Like, I can't wait to not be alone anymore. That's why I'm excited to get married. For some of us, we're getting married because that's just what you do. I'm going to get married because I want to have kids, or I want to get married because I want to have sex, or I want to get married because they're really nice to me. And at a certain point, what you think you should be getting out of marriage, you realize you're not going to get out of marriage. It's not going to be a you getting everything. And so at a certain point, for many of us, we just want to get out of marriage. For Jackie and I, that was about year 2. 2 years into our marriage, and we realized that we weren't getting what we wanted out of it. And now we were lucky enough to have someone come alongside us and say, literally, it's because you're doing it wrong. And the answer is like, how can you tell me I'm doing it wrong? There's no real right way to do it. It's like, yep, there absolutely is one way to do it right. You're doing it wrong. That's why you both want to get out of it. And the major difference is he led us into understanding what God's plan for marriage was, and led us into the word, and led us into submission into it, was the big difference is we get into marriage for us. God gets us into marriage for him and for his sake and what he wants to do in our lives. He wants to show us something. Ephesians has a bunch about marriage. This is a section that we see in that letter that says, as the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. This is the great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way that Christ and the church are one. So again, I say each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. We were only ever given marriage as a thing so that we would actually be able to understand something about who our God is. There are things that you can understand about God, about who he is, his characteristics in marriage that I don't think you're going to learn it anywhere else. I think it has the potential to be an amazing theological education for us in who our God is when we're willing to do marriage as God would design it to be. I think there's a place in marriage where you can understand commitment more than you'd understand it anywhere else. That you would understand passion, that you would understand mercy, that you would understand sacrificial love more than you'd see it anywhere else. And so God gives us this thing called marriage and says, here is on offer for you, if you're both willing, for both of you to receive this, both of you to see this, both of you to see something more of me so that you can know who I am. See, marriage is not like an end to attain. Something's as long as I get married, as soon as I get married. I think marriage is a means to an end. It's a means toward an end, and the end is that we would see more of who our God is. Ephesians 5:21 says that we are to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. I believe that marriage was given to us so that we could submit to each other like we're supposed to submit out of reverence for Christ. Out of understanding who he is and what he's done for us, we would be able to put that into practice in real time. That's the end. That's the purpose. That's the goal. And here's the means of getting there. Wives, the means are to submit to your husband as to the Lord. For husbands, the means are to love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her. The goal of marriage is not that one person would have the authority and the other wouldn't. The goal is not submission. The goal isn't even giving up your life for the other. The goal is that you would show, display, and understand why you revere your God so much. Why he is the way that he is and how he could possibly have the love for you that he does. There are moments in my marriage when I honestly, just straight up ask Jackie the question, why do you put up with me? Because being married to me, there's a lot to put up with. Like, I know you're thinking he's probably perfect. You shouldn't laugh so heftily, so quickly about that comment. I'm deeply insulted over here. Truth be told, I'm not the best husband. I'm incredibly selfish. And all joking aside, I'm still a very sinful person. And so oftentimes, especially when I've done something wrong and I come to realize that I was wrong, even though I pretty much told Jackie I was right, it turns out I'm wrong, I'll ask her, like, why do you put up with me? The truth of the matter is, I think that we were supposed to go through marriage so that we would see something about what forgiveness really means. Why would a spouse forgive over and over and over again? How could they do that? In good dignity, how could they continue to forgive? Well, maybe they could do that because they know how much they've been forgiven by their Father for their sin over and over and over again, and they're showing that now to another person. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation as a couple in which you're pretty sure that they have decided today they're going to be the enemy. Like today, they've decided they're going to do everything they can to get under your skin. They're going to ruin your plans. They're going to do all these other things. Like, my wife doesn't do that, but maybe yours does. And it happens, and then you think to yourself, how are we supposed to love this person who's just decided they're going to be an enemy today? Well, maybe it's because we're supposed to learn what it's like for God to love us. While we were still his enemies, he would send his son to die for us and pay the ransom for our sin. And then you think to yourself, well, how committed is God really? Like, how many years of me being sinful, how much of my nonsense can he take before he would just want to ditch me? I think that's where we get that whole till death do us part thing. Anyone in the room here been married between 0 and 5 years? Anyone 0 and 5 years? Fantastic, got some 0 to 5 years. So we can say, if God, this is a display of Christ in the church, all right, God can do that. God can have forgiveness for me, love for me, mercy me, somewhere between 0 and 5 years, and we get to see that and display when those people continue to go through hard things. Anyone in the 5-year to 25-year bracket? Anyone in the 5-year to 25-year bracket? All right, so that's a good run. So you can look at that and say, okay, so God can do that. If two people can do that, imperfect as they are, maybe God can do that. Anyone here that's got over 25 years of marriage under their belt? You people are crazy. Oh, look at you go. Now, despite them being weird, obviously, and distinct, it is distinct when you see a marriage go that long. That's a lifetime marriage kind of deal, right? And you start to think to yourself, these people, and I know these people that put their hands up, they're not perfect people. Sorry, they are not. Their marriages aren't perfect, and they don't do everything perfect, and they probably frustrate each other a lot, and they probably still sin quite a lot, and they probably have to forgive like we who are in the 0 to 5, the 5 to 25 bracket, yet still they're together. I think we're given that so that we can look and watch and see these two people imperfectly love each other and be committed for a lifetime. That one will die before they would ever get separated. So that we could see that that's how God looks at the church. How Christ looks at the church is, I'm in this forever, baby. I'm in this forever, and there's nothing you can do that's going to make me walk. I think, you see, when it comes to marriage, we were given it as an illustration that we could see something. And so God gives us roles within the marriage so we could have revelation. And to the wives, he says, I want you to play the role of the church. And to the husbands, he says, I want you to play the roles of Jesus Christ. And don't try and tell me that any one of those roles is easier or better than the other. They're distinct and they're different and they're incredibly hard to fulfill. But he offers these things. He gives them to us so we could experience what we're supposed to experience and receive from this thing he calls marriage. Peter goes on, he gets into some specifics, some nitty-gritty details of what it's going to look like. Here's what he says as we go on in 1 Peter. He says, look, to the wives, do what is right without fear of what your husbands might do. Now, my wife gives me quite a lot of authority in our relationship, and I would never abuse that authority by doing anything that would make her be afraid. I would never take our small, delicate, fragile children and do anything that would cause her to have an absolute aneurysm when I send her a slow-mo video and she hates me for days and days and days and days. I would do that, obviously, and a lot of us do. But that's not the kind of fear we're talking about. We're talking about that kind of joy on my daughter's face afterwards. The kind of, all joking aside, you'll always have that little bit of fear of what your husband might do when you give him any authority, because you know he's not perfect. The kind of fear that Peter's talking about is that deeper fear. He's talking about that, what if I do this and he doesn't? What if I do live up to this expectation of a godly woman in marriage and he doesn't? What if he abuses the authority that I would give him? And so you start to see why reading a whole letter of the Bible is really healthy. Because you start to see why it's built upon chapter 2 and chapter 1 of unfair treatment in this world, because this world is imperfect, and even the person you love the most is not 100% trustworthy. And the temptation we have in all things, whenever we're faced with unfair treatment, especially in marriage, is that we give up. Whenever we realize, okay, they're going to screw up, they're going to mess up, they're not going to do this perfectly, the temptation is there to say, you know what, I can no longer trust what the Lord has said. Too much of our depth of relationship with God, we base on the actions of human beings and think that somehow those two things should relate. The offer to our wives is an opportunity that despite what the husband might do, would you do what is right? Do what is right and not have to fear what he will do in turn. That is what God promises and offers. Out of trust for him and respect for your husband, would you trust him enough to do what is right without fear? The second thing that he offers is a lack of concern in the things that everyone else is concerned about. He says, don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, and beautiful clothes. See, God has never looked on the outside and thought, that's how I'm going to judge how this thing is working out. That's how I think how things are going. See, God has this ability to judge from within. And so why would he ever want any of his marriages, the things that he puts together, to be obsessed with how things look on the outside? Obsessed with trinkets that don't actually add to the depth and the beauty and the honor of the marriage. You see, you can have the best looking couple and the kids look like they're put well together and everything looks like it's fine, but how behind closed doors, it's hell on earth. And then you can have in this very room people 25, 30, 40, 50 years, reserved, not ostentatious. You wouldn't even know that they've got the marriage that you wish you had because they've worked on the internal to deepen the internal connection between themselves and the Lord. Focusing only on the external will only ever awaken the external. And our relationships need to be a whole lot deeper than that if they're going to last. And so the offer to our wives is they would live without fear. And they would live without concern of the trappings of the exterior, which don't actually add to the value of a marriage. And then he goes on to the guys. He says, guys, treat your wife with understanding as you live together. Now, that statement right there, the word understanding has all the possibility for us to wrap up in a nice condescending tone. Treat your wives with understanding because they don't know any better. You know, like you would talk to a small child. Now, I would talk to my wife like that, but you guys probably want to lead pastor still next week, so I'm not going to talk to my wife like that. The word that's actually used, which Peter said, does mean understanding, but it doesn't mean it in that tone. It's the Greek word kenosis, which means to treat her with wisdom, to treat her with knowledge, and to treat her with inquiry or inquiry. It means you need to have all the wisdom at your fingertips on display every time you seek to love this woman. Honesty in the room from the husbands. Ever had an instance, an opportunity in which you're thinking to yourself, I completely understand this woman 100%, and that she throws you a massive curveball that you didn't see coming? No hands up. Liars. Absolute liars. Thanks, Donnie. There's appreciation there. The rest of you, I will pray for you that you think you understand your wives completely. Because what happens is we get into marriage and we think, oh, I get her. I get how she is. I get who she is. I get how she needs to be loved and all these other things. And all of a sudden, time goes by, like a day and a half. And you're like, holy moly, there's a whole new piece to her. Because our wives are not two-dimensional people. And if you have the benefit of having a wife that is growing in the Lord, growing in a relationship, she will always be maturing. She will always be changing. So what's Peter really offering? He's offering the advice, treat her with understanding because you don't understand her yet. Always be learning because your job is to protect her, care for her, love her, and value her. And you can't do that if you think you fully understand the depths of her heart on day one. It's our job to have wisdom and inquiry and knowledge in our wives so that we can grow, so that we can love them well. And so God gives you a heads up. You want this thing to go well? Treat her with understanding as you live together. Then he goes on. He says something that we can't avoid. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. She may be weaker. She may be weaker. She's maybe weaker. Here's the truth. She is. In some ways. As in any interaction between two human beings, some are weaker and some are stronger in one way or another. Pastor Pete and I, we have this joke that we have in the office in which when someone will be talking about another individual and we will jokingly say, man, that person is just so solid. They are just so solid in their preaching, so solid in their faith. They have just got it nailed down. And the other one has to say, they are solid in a lot of ways. Because we get into this habit of thinking and expecting that someone has perfected something, that someone's nailed something down. The truth of the matter is, we're all weaker than one another, than someone, in many ways. And so the truth of the matter is, yes, gentlemen, your wife may be weaker than you in a lot of ways, in some ways. The question is not if she is or if she's not. We can go into that argument all day long. The question is, if she's weaker than you in any way, shape, or form, what are you going to do with that weakness? What are you going to do when you find her weakness? Are you going to manipulate it? Are you going to capitalize? Are you going to leverage that weakness so you can get what you want? Or are you going to treat her like her father is watching you and testing to see what you will do when you find out her weakness? Because you see, her father would protect her in her weakness. He would strengthen her in her weakness. He would share in her weaknesses. If we think that we are so deserving of ever should have authority to care for these women, he's wondering, what are we going to do when we see these weaknesses in them? And in both things, for both wives and husbands, there's promise and consequence. Like, hey, you can do marriage however you want. You absolutely can. Here's what's going to happen if you would choose to do it the way that God has called you to do it. First, for the wives, it says that these husbands of yours, they can be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. And husbands, you need to treat her as you should so your prayers will not be hindered. Now, two things that we learn from that. One, the first is that men don't come to God by force. Men don't come to Jesus by somebody guilting them, shaming them into, you better get yourself to church. You better go talk to the pastor. You better be a Christian. It doesn't happen that way. We just know it doesn't. It does happen in men genuinely deeply to the core when God breaks us. When God is allowed to break us because we feel safe enough to be broken before him. When we no longer feel like we have to be ultimately strong at all times, that we can be sinful, we can be messed up, we can be weak, and that's not going to be used against us. When we realize that's what our God's like, and we realize his patience and his mercy and his forgiveness that we need, that's when a man comes to Jesus. And what God's asking is, hey, wives, would you be willing to show him some of that? Some of that, not hiding the fact that he's broken, not hiding the fact that he's sinful, but some of that patience, some of that mercy, some of that not using it against him thing so that he would feel safe to come to me. He's going to be drawn to me by your pure and reverent lives, how you display me to him as I draw him to me. The other thing that we know is women don't come to Jesus, they don't come to God by degradation, oppression. They come because they actually finally realize, and it dawns on them, how valuable they are to him. Like the intrinsic value that he has placed on every single female on the earth. And God's saying to every husband, hey, you want to be part of showing her that? You want to treat her as you should? Because if not, I'm not even going to listen to your prayers. It's that important to me that you treat my daughter as you should. Do you want to be part of doing that with me? Bringing her closer to me. So here we stand. We're all challenged by marriage. We're all challenged about what it is, what it's supposed to be, our own experiences, our future hopes. We're challenged by the most difficult relationship in mankind. And God says, to help you understand it, I want to give you two roles. I want to give you two roles to fulfill so that you can see the illustration of Christ in the church, that you can understand me and know me and revere me and love me. That's what I want you to have. And so he gives us Ephesians 5:21 like it's actually a thing that's supposed to happen. And he says what we're going to do is we're going to mutually submit. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And for wives that means to submit to your husbands as to the Lord. He's asking, would you do this? Would you do this? Would you leave space by handing over authority to him to allow him to rise and excel and to thrive in the role that I have planned out for him? Not to leave space, not to hand over authority so that he can devalue, so that he can trample on who you are and who I've made you to be. Would you do that so that you can see what I can do with him? So that I can actually make him into the man that you want to be married to. I can make him into more and more like my son, Jesus Christ. That's what he's asking wives. And for all those women out there that are looking for marriage, that are single, that are dating, or whatever it might be, if you deep down know that you're not going to hand over authority to your husband, please don't marry him. Please don't marry him, because that is not fair to him. See, God has this idea, this design of using marriage to develop and to grow a man into maturity. And he's going to notice in his marriage when that's missing. Not to blame you, not to point at you, everyone's to blame in the situation, but he's going to notice if you refuse to allow him, if you refuse to let God grow him in that way, by leaving the space for him to develop in his authority and trustworthiness over God's most valuable possession, you. He's going to know something's missing and it's going to go bad. So don't marry him. But our challenge is to husbands to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, giving up your life just as Christ did for the church. God's asking, hey guys, would you do this? I'm not going to give you authority because you deserve it. I'm not giving you authority because you've somehow earned it. I'm going to give you authority as a test. It is a test to see if you're willing to treat my most valuable creation the way that she deserves to be treated. Will you give your life up to honor her? Give your life up to place value into her and treat her like she's a daughter of the King? Will you give her every good reason to want to submit to you, to want to have you lead? Will you treat her how I would treat her? And yeah, you're going to mess it up consistently over and over again. And will you repent and confess? Repent to me, confess to her, and come back and take up the charge again and never give up? Will you be who I've made you to be? And guys, if you're single, if you're dating, if you're looking at marriage, and you know deep down that you do not want to give up your life, your ambition, your desires, your plans for the love and honor and value of this woman, please do not marry her. That's not fair. Because she's been wired to be loved in this way, to be shown her value in this way. And if you marry her and don't tell her, hey, I'm not going to love you this way, she's going to realize something's missing and it's going to go badly. See, there's a lot going on here. It's too much for a 20-minute conversation for me to say, I hope we solved all problems today. What needs to happen is, for those of us who are married, impacted by marriage, have children that might be married one day, we actually have to spend the time understanding why God would say these things, genuinely understanding his heart for these things. So they're not cliche, they're not caricature, they're intentional. Intentionally, he's planned that marriage would play a major part in his church. And it's for us to choose to obey or to not. So here is your challenge, is for it not to end here in this conversation. The first challenge is for you to spend time with God on this very specific thing. It's for you to pray and pry and ask and read and question and find the heart of God. Why would he say these things about husbands and wives? Why is it important to him and to the kingdom and to my bride or to my groom? Why is this valuable and important for me to understand? Read verses that make you don't feel comfortable, but are there intentionally for you to understand his plan. And second, here's a biggie. Talk to each other about this. The worst thing that could happen in your marriage, leaving here today, is you don't talk about this ever again. Silent car ride home, nobody brings it up, and we never talk about it. You can even get in the car and say, wow, that was really dumb. Yes, I agree, honey, that was really dumb. That's much better talking about it than doing nothing. Because if you're not talking about it, I guarantee your spouse is wondering why you're not talking about it. Yes, talking about these things might bring up some difficulties, because there's a good chance you're not nailing it. There's a good chance it's not perfect. And so there's areas to grow, but if you're not willing to talk it out with one another, especially if you're a dating couple or you're an engaged couple, it's going to come back and bite you. And so I challenge you, here's your challenge. Dating, marrieds. Today, before you go to sleep, read Ephesians 5:21 with your loved one. Just read it out loud. Maybe even ask the question on the end, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this out of reverence for Jesus Christ? And start the conversation so that your marriage can be what God designed it to be. The final word's this: marriage is good for us. It's supposed to be good for us. It can be horrible for us, but it's supposed to be good. It's a gift. And it's a gift that shows the rest of the world what our God is like. A chance for us to display some of the characteristics of God and to receive them firsthand, if we will choose the way that God has designed marriage to be. That way we can actually love one another really well, and we can love him in turn by loving the one that he's given to us to love. Let me pray for you guys. Father, I want to pray first, and I want you to be here in the room speaking loudly, moving heart, mind, and emotions, whatever it might be, for those who this is all foreign. That the idea of a good marriage is foreign. That the idea of mutual submission out of love and reverence, that's not even on the radar today. I ask that this not be a condemnation. It's not a condemnation of the divorced. It's not a condemnation of the single. It's not a condemnation of those who don't have that marriage that we want to have. I ask instead that it would be a hope-filled message from you. That you have a design and you have a plan, and it takes two people to submit into it. So God, I ask that you do not let the enemy continue to subject us to shame and guilt, but instead show us how to obey you. Show us how to trust you and obey you, and in that way to reap the reward simply of obedience. And God, for the marriages in the room, I ask that you would stir within us a deep desire for selfishness to die. Selfishness needs to die, so kill it. Allow us to be ready to lay down our lives for our wives, to allow men to take the authority that you've planned for them to take, and for us to see it as an act of worship to you. Give us every good reason for our spouse to want to trust us, to want to love us, but for us to consistently direct them to you as the one that is perfect, the one that won't let them down. Help us in this way to have the marriages you want us for our good, for the sake of the church, and for the sake of the lost. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.